3 alien generals wrestled Charles Porter's unconscious body from the smoking wreckage of his fighter, ready to forge this battle-hardened human mercenary into a weapon to crush their enemies with. Charles had barely escaped when ruthless Zorgons ambushed his squadron, blaring alarms, rocking explosions, a crippled warship disintegrating around him as he fumbled repairs on his mangled craft. One desperate null-space jump later, his shot-up fighter crashed on this unknown jungle world. Injured, alone, stranded, Charles was screwed. Even if the Zorgons didn't track him down to finish the job, just surviving would be hell. But Generals Murloc, Jean, and Orcs had other plans for him. This strange alien warrior was the edge they needed to break the bloody stalemate of their civil war. They'd drag his broken body from the twisted metal, patch him up, and sharpen him into the deadliest soldier this planet had ever seen. If Charles couldn't rise to their grueling training, hone himself into a one-man army, and annihilate their foes, his life and their last shot at victory would be lost. In this brutal alien jungle, failure meant death. Charles's eyes flickered open, squinting against the dim light that seemed to pulse in time with the throbbing pain throughout his body. He was lying on a hard surface, the air heavy with the scent of antiseptic and unfamiliar spices. As his vision adjusted, he made out the silhouettes of 3 figures standing over him. "The human is awake," the central figure said, his voice a deep, rumbling baritone. Charles tried to sit up, wincing as pain lanced through his chest and abdomen. Glancing down, he saw that his torso was wrapped in strange, fibrous bandages. "Easy there, soldier," another voice chimed in, this one lighter and more melodic. "You took quite a beating in that crash." The third figure leaned closer, his features coming into focus. He had leathery grey skin and a wide, flattened nose. Piercing yellow eyes studied Charles with a mix of curiosity and calculation. "I am General Murloc of the Loyalist faction. These are my colleagues, General Jean and General Orcs. You are on Ethoria Prime, human." Charles cleared his throat, his voice raspy. Charles Porter, mind telling me what's going on here?" Murloc exchanged glances with the other 2 before speaking. "Ethoria Prime is in the midst of a civil war that has raged for generations. We Loyalists are fighting against the rebel separatists who seek to overthrow our rightful government. The separatists have been armed with advanced weapons, supplied by your old friends, the Zorgons." Charles grimaced at the mention of the Zorgons. "I'm no friend of theirs. Those bastards ambushed my squadron." Jan nodded. "We gathered as much from the wreckage of your fighter. The separatists are on the brink of victory, human. But we believe you may be the key to turning the tide." "Me?" Charles asked, raising an eyebrow. Corrick stepped forward. "We have a proposition for you, Charles Porter. Train our soldiers in human warfare tactics. Lead them into battle against the separatists. In return, we will grant you your freedom and repair your ship." Charles laughed bitterly, then coughed, clutching his ribs. "Looks like I don't have much of a choice, do I?" Murloc's expression remained impassive. "The choice is yours, human, but know that without our aid you will likely perish on this world." Charles sighed, his gaze hardening. "All right, you've got a deal, but I'm going to need time to recover and assess your troops." Over the next few weeks, Charles worked closely with the Ethorian generals, learning about their culture and the intricacies of their war. He shared stories of his own battles, the strategies and tactics that had kept him alive in countless firefights. As his wounds healed, Charles began to train a hand-picked squad of Ethorian soldiers. He drilled them mercilessly, teaching them the unconventional methods of human warfare: guerrilla tactics, sabotage, psychological manipulation. One soldier in particular caught Charles's eye, a young, eager warrior named Krelock. The Ethorian's idealism and determination reminded Charles of himself at that age before the realities of war had hardened him. "You've got potential, kid," Charles told Krelock one day after a grueling training session, "but potential alone won't keep you alive out there. You've got to be smart, adaptable, and ruthless when the time comes." Krelock nodded, his yellow eyes blazing with intensity. "I understand, Commander Porter. I will not let you down." As the pivotal battle approached, Charles and his team prepared to put their training to the ultimate test. The fate of Ithoria and Charles's own freedom hung in the balance. The ghost unit crept through the thick jungle underbrush, the heat and humidity clinging to their skin like a suffocating blanket. Charles led the way, his senses on high alert, a nagging feeling of unease settling in his gut. The rest of the squad followed close behind, their weapons at the ready, their eyes scanning the dense foliage for any sign of the enemy. Suddenly the silence was shattered by the crack of gunfire. Separatist soldiers emerged from the shadows, their weapons blazing, their ambush perfectly timed. Charles cursed under his breath as he dove for cover, realizing with a sinking feeling that the Separatists had known exactly where to find them. "Take cover," he shouted, his voice barely audible over the din of battle. "Return fire." The ghost unit sprang into action, their training kicking in as they fought back against the Separatist onslaught. Laser blasts sizzled through the air, scorching the trees and sending up plumes of smoke. Charles caught a glimpse of Kraylock, the young Ithorian soldier fighting with a fierce determination. His eyes narrowed in concentration. But the Separatists had the advantage of numbers and surprise. One by one, Charles watched as his men fell, their bodies crumpling to the ground like discarded puppets. He gritted his teeth, his heart pounding in his chest, as he fought on, determined to make the enemy pay for every life they took. And then, in a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Charles saw Kraylock go down, his body jerking as a laser blast caught him square in the chest. Without hesitation, Charles lunged forward, dragging Kraylock to safety behind a fallen tree trunk. "Hold on, kid," Charles muttered, his hands slick with Kraylock's blood. "You're going to be okay." But Kraylock shook his head, a sad smile playing across his lips. "It's too late for me, Commander," he rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. "You have to go on, complete the mission, make my sacrifice mean something." Charles nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "I will, Kraylock, I promise." With a final shuddering breath, Kraylock closed his eyes, his body going limp in Charles's arms. Charles gently laid him down, a burning rage building in his chest. He turned to the remaining members of the ghost unit, his eyes hard with determination. "We finish this," he growled. "For Kraylock, for all of them." The ghost unit pushed forward, their anger and grief fueling their every move. They fought their way through the Separatist lines, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. And when they finally reached the anti-aircraft guns, Charles led the charge, his weapon blazing, his heart filled with a desire for vengeance. They disabled the guns, their mission a success. But as the smoke cleared, Charles found himself surrounded by Separatist soldiers, their weapons trained on him. He was captured, his fate uncertain, his mind reeling with the betrayal that had led them into this trap. Charles was brought before Zorlak, the ruthless leader of the Separatists. The Ithorian regarded him with a cold, calculating gaze, a smile playing across his thin lips. "You fight well, human," Zorlak said, his voice dripping with condescension, "but you fight for the wrong side." Charles spat at Zorlak's feet. "I fight for what's right," he snarled, "not for some puppet master pulling the strings." Zorlak laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Ah, so you've figured it out, have you? Yes, the Zorgans have been playing both sides, weakening Ithoria so they can swoop in and take what they want, and you, Charles Porter, have been their unwitting pawn." Zorlak leaned in close, his breath hot on Charles's face. "Join me, human. Together we can defeat the Zorgans and rule Ithoria as we see fit." But Charles just smiled, a hard, brittle thing. "Go to hell," he said, his voice filled with quiet defiance. And then, as if on cue, the sound of explosions rocked the stronghold. The Loyalist forces had begun their attack, the anti-aircraft guns disabled, their path clear. In the chaos, Charles saw his chance. He broke free from his captors, fighting his way through the confusion, determined to escape and expose the truth. He had to find Murloc and the others, had to tell them what he had learned. The Zorgans were the real enemy, and if the Ithorians didn't unite against them, their planet was doomed. Charles gritted his teeth, his resolve hardening with every step. He would not let Kraylock's sacrifice be in vain. he would not let the Zorgons win. No matter what it took, he would fight on. Charles stumbled into the Loyalist base, his body aching from the battle and his narrow escape. He pushed past the guards, ignoring their startled expressions as he made his way to the command center. The doors slid open, revealing Generals Murloc, Jean, and Orcs huddled around a holographic map of Ithoria. "We've been betrayed," Charles announced, his voice raw with anger and exhaustion. "The Zorgons have been manipulating both sides of this war." Murloc's eyes widened, while Jean's narrowed in suspicion. Orcs, however, remained impassive, his expression unreadable. "And how do you know this, human?" Orcs asked, his voice a low rumble. Charles met his gaze, his own eyes hard with accusation. "Zorlak told me. Right before the Loyalists attacked the Separatist stronghold, the Zorgons have been playing us all for fools." Orcs chuckled, a deep menacing sound that sent a chill down Charles's spine. "Not all of us, Charles Porter. Some of us have been well aware of the Zorgons' involvement." In a flash, Orcs drew his weapon, aiming it squarely at Charles's chest. "The Zorgons promised me power, human, power over all of Ithoria, and all I had to do was ensure that this war continued, that both sides remained weak and divided." Charles tensed, his hand inching towards his own blaster. But before he could make a move, Jean sprang into action, his own weapon drawn, his eyes blazing with fury. "You traitor!" Jean roared, his voice shaking with rage. "You would betray our people, our world, for your own selfish ambition?" Orcs sneered, his finger tightening on the trigger. "I would do whatever it takes to claim what is rightfully mine." The two Ithorians clashed, their weapons flashing, their bodies a blur of motion. Charles and Murloc could only watch, stunned, as the former comrades battled with a ferocity that shook the very foundations of the command center. And then, as if summoned by the chaos, alarms began to blare throughout the base. The holographic map flickered, revealing a new horror. A Zorgon fleet, vast and menacing, entering Ithoria's orbit. "They're here," Murloc whispered, his voice heavy with dread. "The Zorgons have come to claim their prize." Charles gripped Murloc's shoulder, his eyes blazing with determination. "Then we'll just have to make sure they leave empty-handed. We need to rally whatever forces we have left, Loyalist and Separatist alike. It's time to put aside our differences and fight for our world." Murloc nodded, his own resolve hardening. "Agreed. But we'll need more than just Ithorian warriors to face a threat like this." Charles grinned, a fierce, predatory thing. "Leave that to me. I've got some friends in high places who owe me a favor." As Jean and Orcs' duel raged on, Charles and Murloc set to work, contacting allies and marshalling their forces. Charles reached out to the Nova Hawks, his old mercenary company, calling in every favor and debt he had accumulated over the years. "It's time to pay the piper, boys," he said, his voice crackling over the encrypted channel. "And the price is Ithoria's freedom." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, Nova Hawk ships began to appear in Ithoria's skies, their weapons primed, their crews eager for battle. And as the Zorgon invasion force descended upon the planet, they found themselves facing not a fractured, weakened people, but a united front, Ithorian and human alike, ready to fight to the last breath for their home. Charles stood at the forefront of the resistance, his eyes hard, his jaw set with determination. He knew that the odds were against them, that the Zorgons were a formidable foe, but he also knew that he had faced worse odds before and come out on top. And so as the battle raged across the planet, as laser fire scorched the skies and explosions shook the ground, Charles led a daring mission to strike at the heart of the Zorgon invasion, their command ship. He and a hand-picked team of Ithorian and Nova Hawk warriors infiltrated the massive vessel, fighting their way through hordes of Zorgon soldiers and battle droids. Their goal was simple: capture the ship's bridge, and with it, the Zorgon commander, a towering, genetically engineered monstrosity known as Zorgax. The fighting was fierce, brutal, and unrelenting. Charles and his team took heavy losses, their numbers dwindling with each passing minute. But they pushed on, driven by a desperate, unyielding determination to see their mission through. And then, at last, they reached the bridge. Charles burst through the doors, his weapon blazing, his eyes locked on the hulking figure of Zorgax. The Zorgon commander was a terror to behold, his body a mass of rippling muscle and gleaming metal, his eyes glowing with a malevolent intelligence. "Welcome, Charles Porter," Zorgax rumbled, his voice a deep, guttural growl. "I have been expecting you." Charles grinned, a fierce, feral thing. "Then you know why I'm here." The two warriors clashed, their bodies a whirlwind of violence and savagery. Zorgax was stronger, faster, his body enhanced by Zorgon science, but Charles was cunning, his mind honed by a lifetime of warfare and survival. He ducked and weaved, using the ship's cramped confines to his advantage, striking at Zorgax's weak points with a ruthless precision. In the end, it was Charles who emerged victorious, his blade finding the chink in Zorgax's armor, his final blow sending the Zorgon commander crashing to the deck, his lifeblood pooling on the cold metal floor. With Zorgax's fall, the Zorgon invasion faltered, their command structure thrown into disarray. The tide of the battle turned, the Ithorian and Novahawk forces seizing the initiative, driving the invaders back with a ferocious determination. And as the last Zorgon ship fled Ithoria's orbit, as the smoke began to clear and the fires began to die, Charles stood amidst the ruins of the battlefield, his body battered, but his spirit unbroken. He had fought for Ithoria, for its people, for the memory of those who had fallen in its defense. And though the cost had been high, though the scars would linger long after the fighting had ended, Charles knew that it had been worth it. For in the end, Ithoria was free, its people united, its future bright with the promise of hope and rebuilding. And Charles Porter, the human mercenary who had started as a prisoner and ended as a savior, could rest easy knowing that he had played his part in that glorious, hard-won victory. Charles stood amidst the ruins of the battlefield, his body aching, his heart heavy with the weight of the lives lost. The Ithorians and their human allies had emerged victorious, but the cost had been high, too high. He thought of General Jeanne, the honorable warrior who had sacrificed himself to kill the traitorous Orcs and save Charles' life. Jeanne's death was a blow to the loyalist cause, a loss that would be felt for years to come. But even in the midst of their grief, the Ithorians were already beginning to rebuild. United under General Murlock's leadership, they set about the task of healing their war-torn planet, of forging a new future from the ashes of the old. Charles watched them work, a sense of pride mingling with the sorrow in his chest. These were a strong people, a resilient people. They would survive this, as they had survived so much before. Murlock approached him, his expression a mix of gratitude and respect. "Charles Porter," he said, his voice a low rumble, "Ithoria owes you a debt that can never be repaid. You have fought for us, bled for us, and we will forever be in your debt." Charles shook his head. "I only did what was right," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "and I couldn't have done it without you, without your people." Murlock placed a hand on Charles's shoulder, his grip firm and reassuring. "You will always have a place among us, Charles. Ithoria will always be your home." For a moment, Charles was tempted to stay, to build a new life on this world that he had fought so hard to save. But he knew that he couldn't. The weight of the lives lost under his command, the memories of those he couldn't save, they haunted him still. "I appreciate the offer," he said, his voice heavy with regret, "but I can't stay. I need to keep moving, to find my own path." Murlock nodded, his expression one of understanding. "Then go with our blessing," he said, "and know that you will always be welcome here." As Charles prepared to depart, Murlock presented him with a parting gift, a beautifully crafted Ithorian sword, its blade gleaming in the light. "A symbol of the bond we share," Murlock said, his voice thick with emotion, "of the battles we have fought and the victories we have won." Charles took the sword, his fingers closing around the hilt. It felt right in his hand, a reminder of all that he had been through, all that he had fought for. He boarded his ship, its hull repaired and upgraded with Ithorian technology, The Novahawks had already departed, their mission complete, their debts to Charles paid in full. As he plotted his course, Charles couldn't shake the feeling that his journey was far from over. The Zorgons were still out there, their empire weakened, but not destroyed. There would be other battles to fight, other worlds to save. And then, just as he was about to engage the hyperdrive, a message flashed across his screen. It was from an unknown sender, its contents cryptic and unsettling. "The Zorgons are just pawns," it read. "The real enemy is hiding in the shadows. Find me if you want to know the truth." Charles felt a chill run down his spine. He had always suspected that there was more to the Zorgon invasion than met the eye, that there were deeper forces at work behind the scenes. And now it seemed he had a chance to uncover the truth, to follow the trail wherever it might lead, and to face whatever challenges lay ahead. With a heavy heart and a newfound sense of purpose, Charles engaged the hyperdrive, the stars blurring into streaks of light as he hurtled into the unknown. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that he would face it head-on with all the courage and determination that had brought him this far. For he was Charles Porter, the human mercenary, the hero of Ethoria, and his journey was just beginning. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.